Hello everyone and welcome to the Knowledge Pool, your source for everything regarding the rules of Magic the Gathering. Today we'll be going over the mechanics of the new set Streets of New Capenna and some rule intricacies they have. Let's begin. Starting off with the band family, the Brokers, we have the seal counters mechanic. So let's see, for example, Disciple Duelist. It's just a band colors for a creature human citizen 2-1 with double strike, and on ETB it gets a seal counter, which in the parentheses explicitly says that if this creature will be dealt damage or be destroyed, you remove a seal counter from it instead. So two things to note here. The counter has that property, so if you move it around with a nesting crouch, for example, the other creature would have that ability because the ability to prevent destruction is associated with the seal counter itself. Also, the seal counter is removed from any damage dealt to the source, even if that source wouldn't be lethal. And also, if there are multiple seal counters, it even says so the reminder text, you just remove one to replace that effect, whether it is the damage or the destruction. An interesting thing to note here is that there is a card from the old Ravnica set, and that card is called Palliation Accord, which also uses seal counters to represent the counter that it gets, which actually contradicts with the seal counters from this set. So I'm curious to see what wizards we do with that particular enchantment. They probably would just either change the name or something, I don't know. And one final note on the Brokers mechanic is that this counter can also be put on a permanent, and it would function essentially the same way for distraction if it is not a creature. Next up is the Esper family, or the Obscura as they're called in the set, with the mechanic Connive. Connive is a new keyword ability that says essentially that a creature will connive, and it could even connive X times. But let's see, for example, Ledger Shredder, which is a 1 and a blue for a 1/3 flyer bird advisor. And whenever a player casts a second spell its turn, this card connives. And in the parentheses we see that we draw a card, then we discard the card, and if the card we discarded was a non-land card, this card gets a counter, +1/+1 counter. So this ability obviously happens at once, so it's not a separate trigger. We draw, we discard, and then if we don't discard the land, we put a counter to this. It's pretty self-explanatory. There will be abilities probably that will trigger when a creature connives, so when we finally draw and discard the card. Also, their guild leader Raffine allows us to connive X times, which means that we draw X cards and discard X cards, and for each card discarded this way, we put the counter on the creature we chose. Up next is the Grixis family, or the Maestros, and their mechanic is Casualty. So let's see, for example, a card here, a little chat is an instant for 1 and a blue, and it says Casualty 1. So as an additional cost to cast the spell, or as we cast the spell, we may sacrifice a creature with power 1 or greater, and when we do, we copy that spell. And we do this effect 2 times, which is like a mini impulse. Now, Casualty can be varied, so the mechanic essentially is Casualty X, as we'll see more cards with Casualty. Because it says spell, also we could see it on non-instant or sorcery cards like the new Pixelis, which has Casualty X. And also, important thing here, it functions exactly like Conspire. Instead of tapping the creatures, we sacrifice a creature. And here's what happens. So we cast the spell with Casualty, we choose to copy the spell by sacrificing a creature as we cast the spell. Then, when we have finished doing that, the spell is placed on the stack, and the trigger to copy it is placed directly on top of it. So when resolving the spell, you have the spell and the trigger to copy the spell. The trigger resolves, and you have the copy of the spell on the stack, resolving before the actual spell. Also, one really important thing to note here is that there is the new Grixis commander Anhelo the Painter, which essentially gives your first instant sorcery spell you cast its turn Casualty 2. The important thing to note here is that if you somehow make him 2 power and sacrifice him, The instant sorcerer you are trying to cast that has Casualty 2 won't actually have Casualty if you choose to sacrifice him, because he is no longer in play when the spell is put to the stack, so it loses the Casualty text. So keep it in mind if you choose to play this as a commander and you want to increase his power for some reason, don't sacrifice him. Also, it doesn't say it on every card. If a spell does not have a target, it won't say you to choose new targets for the copy, but if a spell has a target, it will say that you choose new targets for the copy. Next up is the Giant Color family, or the Riveteers, which have the mechanic Blitz. So let's see an example card. We have Jaxis the Troublemaker. It's a 3 and red for a 2/3 legendary creature human warrior. We don't care about the first ability, we care about the Blitz. So Blitz, it will be Blitz and the cost. And if you cast a spell for its Blitz cost, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next step. So this is pretty much a mix of Unearth, Dash, and Evoke. So Blitz is an alternative casting cost of casting a card. If we choose to cast for this cost, three things happen. First, the creature gains haste, like Dash, and the ability that when it dies, we draw a card. And the other ability is a delay triggered ability that is created when we cast the spell with the alternative Blitz cost, which says that it will sacrifice the creature at the beginning of the next end step. So, if you somehow manage to make a creature lose the abilities, it will still be sacrificed because it's exactly like Dash, and the delay triggered ability is dependent on the alternative cost we pay. So dress down, again, it will pretty much shut this card completely off. And also, if you try to be sneaky, like play a Line of Anticipation and sneak it at their opponent's end step, so we have it on our turn, which doesn't make much sense because the creature has haste anyway, it will be sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step, so we can never essentially miss the sacrifice trigger unless you play a card like Sundial of Infinite that ends the turn. So with the trigger of the stack, we could end the turn and then the sacrifice wouldn't happen. The final family are the Cabaretti, or the Naya 3-color combination, with the mechanic Alliance, which is essentially a flavor keyword that when another creature enters the battlefield, do something. And that something will differ depending on card to card, so you have to read the text every time. For example, let's say Rumor Gatherer is a 1 for 2 white and 2 green creature elf wizard with Alliance, and whenever the creature enters the battlefield, you can scry 1, and if it's the second time this ability has a drop, draw a card. So as you can see, every different Alliance card will be varied. Essentially, Alliance is what we call it a flavor keyword, is because even if the Alliance text wasn't there, you could still see the card and it would just be a trigger on enter the battlefield. But because it's the flavor of the set, they use that. So a thing to note about Rumor Gatherer here is that essentially only the second time the ability resolves draws you a card. So let's say you have this on the board already and you play a Spectral Possession, you get 3 triggers because 3 creatures enter the battlefield. And you get to essentially scry 1, draw a card, scry 1. Because it says that if it's the second time this ability has resolved, draw a card. So it only replaces the second scry with a draw, and anything after that will be just a scry 1. And finally, there is a new returning mechanic on this set that is not affiliated with any family specifically, which is Hideaway. And Hideaway has been changed since Lorwyn lands and the Watcher of Tomorrow from Other Horizons. So the change here is now that Hideaway will have a number. So for example, Wiretapping is a 4 and a glue for enchantment that has Hideaway 5. So the number on the Hideaway will indicate how many cards you get to look from the top of your library, and you always will exile just 1 card face down. Now, what this means for the old cards, and we already kinda knew that from the secret versions of the Hideaway lands, is that the old cards that had Hideaway, which is the 5 lands that Watcher of Tomorrow, will have a separate text line when they will let it play tapped, and the Hideaway will be 4 for them, because that was the original intent for the Hideaway. So this is a very interesting change, because they remove the enters the battlefield tapped part to not make awkward board states, like imagine wiretapping needing to be entered play tapped. So Hideaway will change, will probably see reflected on the comprehensive rules upon the release of the set. They will remove the text where it will say that enters tapped and just now it will be Hideaway X. So this was everything new regarding mechanics from the new set of Magic the Streets of New Capenna. Hope you learned something watching this video. Hope the new mechanics are not too confusing. They are certainly very interesting. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next video.